A shoot 'em up where you can move around but release before Pocky and Rocky? Here it is, I'm Araknie and I bring you Märchen Maze, just as requested. And as expected of something from 1988, it's not super varied, but it does a pretty good job of what it has. Anyway, the story. It might surprise you to hear that it's lifted directly from Alice Through the Looking Glass. Yes, the most well-known book sequel after Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, not the first book. They decided to do it with this one instead. Well, it's a rightful reason. It's a bit more high stakes and action-oriented, and it has a more clear villain and final encounter. Barring the ending of that book because it starts implications that are quite wild. If you haven't read it, I highly suggest you doing so, by the way. For me, it was a fantastic sequel to the first one that goes really wild with the world built previously. Here it got changed around a little bit but kept the long distance traveling feeling of it. First of all, with button 1 you jump and with 2 you shoot bubbles. If you keep the second one pressed for a long enough time, you get to grow your attack into a bigger one, up until a certain limit obviously. A special feature is that if you get hit, you don't cancel your attack but you shoot it as is. Obviously this works only if you were charging and not just spam shooting. Plus you don't have an health bar nor damage. Instead, when you get a collision, you end up moving away in the opposite direction from it. Always. The game doesn't cheat you ever, and not even in that regard. So you can lose only if you drop from the platforms into the background, jump at the right time, and you might save yourself. People familiar with this title, they might have noticed that this looks different than what they might remember. Obviously the original arcade game looks better as usual for arcade titles of this era up until 2001. Before DVD technology, consoles couldn't really compete. So you can see that the original has a different viewpoint and a different approach. You can consider this Total Conversion a completely different title. And I play this for that reason. The original has checkpoints and both games are long 9 stages. That's a bit much, since every time you die 3 times in a boss fight you have to start it from the beginning. In the PC Engine version they implemented a little code that if activated with a combination of buttons will allow you to have infinite lives. That means respawning where you died, and not only 2 times like in the original. This is a great improvement because each level has different enemies and some different traps. So you won't really learn anything unless you manage to get to the end of it. After that, and taking some notes on what expects you, you can try playing it with what the Märchen Maze gives you to start with. There is an extra life hidden on every stage after all, so it's not impossible. The really only hard one is the Land of Ice. Yeah, we got another case of slippery sloppery. What's gonna be really hard for you is on the boss side, and that's good. A game where all bosses are harder than the stages can be a bad game in my opinion. I mean, it can, but that would be a really baffling case. Especially since they all act differently. 9 bosses with different behaviors isn't an easy feat in 1990 on the dot, even less so in the arcade original 1988 release. Can't complain too much here. Sure, it's not too much to look at, but they took care to add different backgrounds for every location. And some of them are even animated. Namco already supported this console with Splatterhouse previously, and now they brought this over in a more in-depth overhaul that you can imagine. Cutscenes for the beginning and ending, plus some level intros that I always appreciate. Presentation-wise, it truly is pretty for what they had to change. Every location gets its own color identity too, plus new enemies and no repeats on that front. Only some traps come back but mixed in with new ones also. They really tried to bring most of the arcade in this version as possible. Musically is a pretty jolly affair. After all, we're playing as Alice and not as Gruff McDooder 3000, even if it does get tense in the most frantic moments in its own way. When you're near the end of it all, and during boss fights, they know how to ramp up the manic feeling of this fun ride. After all this murder, what can we think about it? That Märchen maze deserves a 7 out of 10. It's more than what I thought after playing the first stage. What's missing is, coincidentally, what was also missing from Pocky and Rocky. More variety, interesting stages, something truly unique. But it's a solid title and good fun for a one time only. If you wanna see me play the games that I will review plus some extra stuff, catch me on Twitch at Araknie Retro. It's my natural habitat, you see? Until next time, ciao ciao!